This is the real case of George Penka, 2009, Yosemite National Park, California. Let us know in the comments which city and country you're watching from. The sun was beginning to dip behind the rugged granite cliffs of Yosemite National Park, casting long, dramatic shadows across the valley floor. It was June 17, 2009, a day that began like any other for a group of high school students from San Luis Obispo, California, who had come to Yosemite for a 4-day religious retreat organized by Calvary Church. Among them was George Penka, an 18-year-old with a quiet smile and a soft-spoken demeanor. George wasn't the loudest in the group, but he was deeply respected. Thoughtful, kind, the sort of kid adults trusted and peers looked up to. They had spent most of the day hiking and sharing devotionals. That evening, the group attended a spiritual concert at Curry Village, a lively open-air area surrounded by pine trees and jagged mountain peaks. Dozens of young people clapped and sang together, bonding through music and faith. George was there, standing with his group, enjoying the energy. But sometime during the event, he simply disappeared. One moment, he was among friends. The next, gone. It took a while for anyone to realize he was missing. With so many people moving around, it wasn't strange to think someone had wandered off to use the restroom or stepped away to make a call. But as the concert ended and the group began to gather near their campsite, someone asked, "Where's George?" They checked the tent. Empty. They looked by the food area. Nothing. They asked around. No one had seen him since earlier that evening. Panic started to creep in. The leaders called out his name into the night. Others spread out, flashlights cutting into the darkness, sweeping through the trees. The Yosemite wilderness, so majestic by day, felt unforgiving and endless under the stars. That night, the camp stayed awake, hoping George would emerge from the shadows, smiling sheepishly and explaining some innocent misunderstanding. But he didn't. By morning, the fear had turned into alarm. Park rangers were notified immediately. A formal search and rescue operation was launched. Within hours, helicopters were circling overhead. Search teams, equipped with dogs, maps, and radios, fanned out across the rugged terrain. They explored creeks, ravines, and wooded paths. Flyers with George's photo were printed and distributed. Every person in the park became a potential witness. But George had vanished. No one saw him leave. No one saw where he went. There were no signs of struggle, no trace of clothing or footprints. Nothing. As the hours turned to days, questions multiplied. Why would a well-adjusted teenager walk off alone into one of America's most dangerous wilderness areas without telling anyone? Was it possible he'd fallen and gotten injured? Or worse, could someone have taken him? The park, though expansive, was bordered by cliffs, rivers, and dense forests, all of which posed dangers. But George wasn't reckless. He wasn't known for wandering off. And yet, despite the full-force effort of trained professionals and volunteers, not a single clue emerged. George Penka had, quite literally, disappeared without a trace. As day 2 dawned over Yosemite, the sense of dread settled deeper into the camp. The initial adrenaline of the search had given way to an aching, hollow tension. George Penka was not the kind of person to stir up drama or vanish for attention. He wasn't troubled. He had no known mental health issues. His life back home was stable. He lived with his mother and younger siblings, helped around the house, and was about to graduate high school. His future, though still unfolding, was bright. That's what made his disappearance so deeply unsettling. The rangers expanded the search perimeter. Over 50 personnel scoured Curry Village and beyond. Search dogs sniffed for any scent. Helicopters flew low over ridges, and skilled rock climbers descended dangerous cliffs. Every cave, every stream, every possible nook was investigated. It wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was a race against time. Bears, mountain lions, falls. The wilderness could be fatal for anyone alone. especially a teenager with no gear or provisions. Yet, despite the scale and intensity of the search, there was no sign of George, no shirt snagged on a branch, no torn backpack, not a single footprint leading away from the last place he was seen. Nothing. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole and closed behind him. Meanwhile, George's family arrived at the park. His mother, Anna Maria, was gripped by a grief too raw to hide. She clutched a small photo of George, the kind you'd put in a wallet, and spoke softly to anyone who'd listen, hoping someone had seen something, anything. Volunteers from local churches, hikers, even tourists began helping in the search, moved by the story of the boy who had vanished in plain sight. The FBI was notified. Although it was not yet treated as an abduction, the sheer lack of evidence triggered suspicions. Agents interviewed everyone in the camp. Where was George sitting? Who was with him? Did anyone notice anything strange? Was he upset, distracted, or restless that day? But again, nothing. All who were with George that evening described it as a normal night. No fights, no signs of distress, just songs, laughter, and prayer. George had even been seen laughing during the concert, swaying to the rhythm like everyone else. No one remembered him leaving. Not one witness saw him walk away. To deepen the mystery, Curry Village isn't a remote off-the-grid zone. It's a bustling area with pathways, signage, and facilities. Even at night, it doesn't go completely dark. How could someone simply disappear from such a place? Rangers began entertaining unusual theories. Could George have hit his head and wandered off with amnesia? Had he chosen to run away despite no warning signs? Or, the theory no one wanted to say out loud, had something sinister happened to him? As night fell again, George's group gathered by a campfire, holding hands in silence. Prayers were whispered. Tears were shed. But beneath the surface, everyone was thinking the same thing. What if he was still out there, hurt, calling for help, and no one could hear him? The woods seemed quieter now, as if they knew something the rest didn't. George Penka was gone, but the questions were only beginning. By the third day, the media had caught wind of the story. Local news vans lined the entrance to Yosemite, reporters delivering live coverage against the backdrop of towering cliffs and dense pines. The phrase, "vanished in Yosemite," began appearing on TV tickers and headlines, casting a haunting tone over a national park usually associated with awe, not mystery. Journalists interviewed park officials, family members, and campers, all searching for a thread, a pattern, anything to explain how George Penka, an 18-year-old full of life and promise, could simply disappear without leaving a single clue. Park rangers increased their coordination with outside agencies. Drones were deployed, still relatively rare in 2009, but accessible to law enforcement. And thermal imaging was attempted in hopes of detecting body heat in the thick forest canopy. Divers were sent into the nearby Merced River and smaller creeks, fearing he may have fallen into the water. Cave experts explored fissures and narrow openings that the average person might not notice. Each path they followed, each crevice they illuminated, ended in disappointment. There was no scent trail, no signal from George's phone, which he'd likely left at camp. No witnesses from outside the group. Not a single hiker, camper, or park visitor had seen a boy matching George's description on the trails. He hadn't tried to hitchhike out. There were no signs he'd purchased food or left the park. The forest had kept its secrets. His disappearance started to divide people. Some believed he had walked off intentionally. Maybe he had a crisis of faith. Others thought he had been abducted, that someone lurking nearby had taken advantage of the crowd, the music, the distraction. But how? In a public, open space? Without anyone seeing? Even wilder theories emerged. Some speculated about underground caves, secret hideouts, or even Bigfoot. A desperate grasp for answers in the face of a blank wall of facts. But law enforcement remained grounded. They focused on the known. George had been last seen near Curry Village, sometime between 8:30 and 9:20 p.m., during a concert. After that, everything was speculation. Back home, his classmates held vigils. Churches opened their doors for prayer services. Candlelight flickered in windows across San Luis Obispo. His teachers described him as dependable and gentle. Friends remembered him as the one who stayed behind to clean up after events, who listened more than he talked, who never judged. This wasn't a kid who would fake his disappearance. This was someone who had plans, responsibilities, someone who mattered deeply to those around him. And yet, in Yosemite, time was running thin. On the 5th day, the official search was scaled back. After combing through over 50 square miles of rugged terrain, with no clue, no trail, and no progress, the authorities had little choice. Resources were limited. The chances of survival if George had been injured or lost were now statistically near zero. His mother refused to leave. She set up a small vigil near the campground, lighting a candle each night. A photo of George, printed and laminated by volunteers, sat on a folding table beside a log. Passers-by stopped to offer prayers, hugs, and supplies. The mood had shifted. Hope hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer hopeful anticipation. It was hope born of desperation. And the forest? It remained quiet. No answers, no footprints, no body. Just echoes, just questions. Just the chilling sense that something, or someone, was still out there, watching, silent. A week had passed since George Penka vanished, and with each sunrise, the stillness in Yosemite grew heavier. Nature, indifferent and unmoved, continued as if nothing had happened. Tourists still hiked scenic trails. Families took photos near waterfalls. Rangers gave their daily safety talks. But beneath the surface, there was a tension, an unease that crept into conversations and lingered in the air. George's disappearance had become a ghost story in real time, and everyone in the park could feel it. Unofficial searchers kept coming. Hikers who had never met George traveled hours just to walk the terrain he might have covered. Online forums began buzzing with theories. Armchair detectives dissected the geography of Curry Village and studied topographic maps of Yosemite's trails, looking for patterns. Some suggested he had followed a deer trail that led him far from the main paths. Others believed he had taken a wrong turn while trying to find solitude, perhaps for prayer or reflection, and got lost in the sprawling wilderness. But those who knew George insisted that didn't fit. He was responsible, not impulsive. He wasn't the type to wander alone, especially in unfamiliar territory. And the concert had been joyful. There had been no arguments, no signs of emotional distress. Still, the lack of evidence forced people to fill in the blanks with their own logic or their own fears. Ana Maria, George's mother, refused to believe her son had simply walked into the forest and died unnoticed. She stayed in Yosemite for weeks, long after the official search ended. Locals helped her, providing food, helping her post fresh flyers, organizing small prayer walks. At night, she sat near the campfire staring into the trees, waiting. What haunted everyone was not just the loss, but the silence. Most missing person cases leave behind breadcrumbs: a jacket, a call, a witness, a scream. George left behind nothing. He had been surrounded by people and then somehow completely alone. Months passed, then years. In 2010, a year after his disappearance, a new wave of volunteers retraced the entire area during the anniversary week. George's story had become part of the park's whispered folklore, a name shared around campfires, a warning told to new hikers. Stay with your group. Remember George Penka. Rangers still kept his case file open, and once in a while, when a body was found elsewhere in the park, a tragic but not uncommon event, there would be a flicker of hope. But each time, the remains belonged to someone else. George's church held annual memorial services. His classmates moved on to college, jobs, families, but always carried a part of the mystery with them. For those who had shared that trip, the loss was personal. They still saw him in dreams, still pictured him smiling in the crowd that night. Some felt guilt. Others felt fear. All of them were changed. Yosemite remained majestic. Towering cliffs, crystal-clear streams, ancient trees. But for those who knew what had happened, or more accurately, what had never been explained, the park had taken on a darker tone. A place of wonder, yes, but also of vanishing. George wasn't the only one to ever disappear in Yosemite, but his case stood out. No arguments, no strange behavior, no possible motive. Just a teenage boy at a concert. Then gone, vanished, without a cry, without a sign, without a goodbye. 2 years had passed. By 2011, George Penka's name had faded from news headlines, but remained etched in the minds of those who knew him, and those obsessed with the mystery. Online forums had transformed his disappearance into something almost mythic. Reddit threads, YouTube comment sections, and obscure missing persons blogs dissected every available detail. Some threads ran hundreds of replies deep, arguing over distances, timelines, and witness reliability. But the deeper they dug, the clearer one thing became. Nothing about George's case made sense. He wasn't in a remote section of the park. He wasn't alone, and he didn't fit the usual profile of someone likely to vanish. He wasn't a loner, wasn't unstable, wasn't lost in life. If anything, George had structure, direction, and support. So what happened? Some independent investigators became fixated on the layout of Curry Village itself. With its mix of tent cabins, paved paths, and limited access points, it was hard to believe someone could disappear there without being seen. Was it possible that George had stepped into a nearby maintenance area or off-trail pocket and had an accident, a fall, or a medical emergency, and simply lay somewhere undetected? That theory lost weight with each passing year. Search teams had covered the area in 2009 with military precision. Dogs had canvassed every known trail. Helicopters had scanned from above. Experienced rangers, intimately familiar with every ridge and rock, had personally led the search. If George was in the area, they should have found him. So the focus shifted again. Was someone else involved? The FBI quietly continued looking into backgrounds. They reviewed registered sex offenders in the region, conducted interviews with past campers, even analyzed logs of vehicles entering and leaving the park around the time of George's disappearance. Nothing suspicious turned up. No predators known to frequent the area. No reports of strange individuals near the concert. No guests unaccounted for. But that, too, raised a chilling thought. If this was an abduction, it was executed flawlessly. No screams, no struggle, no trail. Was it someone who knew the park intimately? Someone who could blend into the trees and disappear just as easily? Anna Maria never gave up. She appeared on podcasts, spoke to documentary filmmakers, and sat with cold case detectives whenever they called. Her interviews were always soft-spoken, composed, but her eyes carried the weight of a woman who had lived too long without closure. She didn't want revenge. She wanted her son, or at the very least, the truth. Each new lead, no matter how flimsy, reignited her hope. In 2013, a hiker reported seeing what he thought was a young man matching George's description near the edge of a steep ravine. But by the time rangers followed up, a rock slide had made the area inaccessible. It was a lead, like so many others, that ended in silence. Then came the letters. Anonymous, typed, and sent directly to Anna Maria's church. The content was cryptic. One read, "You're looking in the wrong place. George left for a reason." Another said, "He's not missing. He's just not yours anymore." The local police analyzed the letters, but fingerprints were smudged, and no one could determine the sender. Hoaxes? Possibly. But what if they weren't? It opened the door to another theory, one that some quietly believed but few dared to voice out loud. Did George choose to vanish? Could he have orchestrated his own disappearance? The theory angered some. To them, it was impossible. George wasn't manipulative. He wasn't selfish. But as the years stretched longer with no trace, no body, no evidence, people started asking, how else do you explain nothing? By 2015, 6 years had passed. George Pensa was now legally declared dead. The words landed like a final blow on a wound that had never healed. There had been no ceremony, no discovery, no farewell. Just paperwork, a government decision meant to provide closure for families, insurance, and records. But to Ana Maria, it felt like the system was erasing her son a second time. Yet she refused to stop searching. She kept his room exactly the way he left it. His Bible, his guitar pick, a pair of sneakers still by the door. On her fridge, a fading flyer from 2009 still clung with a magnet, George's photo slightly curled at the edges. In interviews, she spoke of him in the present tense, not because she was in denial, but because she believed. Deep down, she believed he was out there, somewhere. But as time passed, the story lost traction. Other cases, newer tragedies, took the spotlight. A generation grew up without ever hearing George's name. Curry Village was renovated. Campsites were shuffled. Trees were cleared. Landscapes changed. And with them, so did memories. Even some of those who had been on the trip, George's friends, his classmates, struggled to recall exact details. Trauma had blurred the lines. Was it 8:40 or 9 Kas when they last saw him? Was he standing near the left side of the stage or farther back? Little details that once seemed crystal clear now dissolved in the fog of time. But the hole George left behind didn't fade. It grew deeper, a void of logic, a rupture in understanding. Some cold case investigators began quietly connecting George's disappearance to a pattern, a string of unusual vanishings in or near national parks. All shared a common theme: individuals who disappeared suddenly, silently, in well-trafficked areas without clues. Some were later found under bizarre circumstances, miles away from where they vanished, without shoes, or in places previously searched. But many, like George, were never found at all. These connections sparked an underground wave of speculation. Entire YouTube channels were dedicated to this phenomenon. People whispered about energy vortexes, infrasound, even government black sites hidden beneath public land. For some, these theories offered comfort, a way to believe that George hadn't just vanished, but had been taken by something bigger, something unknowable. But Ana Maria didn't buy into the supernatural. To her, George wasn't a mystery. He was a person, a son, a boy who liked peanut butter sandwiches and old acoustic ballads, a kid who volunteered at church and hated horror movies. She didn't need a cosmic theory. She needed answers. Then, in 2017, something unusual happened. During trail maintenance in a more remote section of Yosemite, rangers uncovered a weathered piece of blue fabric tangled in the underbrush. Half buried, faded, but unmistakably once part of a hoodie. It resembled the one George had been wearing the night he disappeared. DNA testing was inconclusive. There was no usable biological material, but it reopened interest in the case. Teams rescanned the area but again found nothing else. No bones, no objects. Just that lone damaged scrap. Was it his? Maybe. But without confirmation, it was yet another question stacked on top of dozens already unanswered. For Ana Maria, it was hope. For investigators, it was a puzzle piece that didn't connect to anything else. For everyone else, it was a cruel reminder. George Pensa had not just gone missing. He had vanished into a space where logic, time, and reason no longer seemed to apply. The older the mystery grew, the more it seemed to resist resolution. By 2020, Yosemite had long returned to its rhythm. bustling during the summers, silent and snow-covered in the winters. But every so often, someone would stop at the ranger station and ask, "Wasn't this the place where that boy disappeared?" A few still remembered his name. Most just recalled the eerie story. A teenager at a concert. Gone. No sound, no struggle, no trace. But for Anna Maria, the clock had never moved forward. Each year on June 17th, she returned to the same spot at Curry Village. She would sit alone, a folding chair facing the forest, her hands resting on a framed photograph of George, smiling beneath a crown of dark curls. People came and went, a few pausing respectfully, others too young to know why she was there. She didn't mind. She wasn't there for them. She was there for him. In the silence of those moments, she said she could still feel him. Not in a ghostly way, not some mystical presence, but a mother's instinct, a knowing, as if somewhere, just beyond the reach of sound or sight, her son was still trying to come home. And then, something strange happened again. In the summer of 2022, a retired park ranger named Bill Thompson came forward during an interview for a documentary on cold cases. Near the end of the shoot, off camera, he spoke about something he had never shared publicly. He recalled being part of the early search effort in 2009. On the second night, he had been stationed near a ravine close to Curry Village, about a mile and a half off the main trail. Around 3 a.m., while doing a perimeter sweep, he claimed he heard something. Not a cry exactly, but a sound. A human sound. Like someone exhaling sharply or murmuring under strain. He had called out, shined his flashlight, waited. Silence. He chalked it up to fatigue, maybe even the wind. He didn't report it. But it haunted him. For years. What if that sound had been George? When asked why he didn't come forward sooner, Bill simply said, "Because I wasn't sure it was real. And by the time I was, it was already too late." That revelation reignited interest online. True crime channels dug deep into terrain maps and nighttime audio from that search. They tried to pinpoint where George could have gone if he had fallen, or if he had fled something. But as always, no conclusion, just theories. A new investigative podcast picked up the case. Episode after episode examined timelines, motives, psychology. They interviewed psychologists, search and rescue experts, even spiritual leaders. The podcast exploded in popularity, and suddenly George's story was in the national spotlight again. Still, no answers emerged. Some speculated that George had been lured, that someone at the concert may have quietly drawn him away. Others proposed a psychological break, something so subtle no one noticed. But again, nothing matched his character, his demeanor, his history. Then a haunting realization began to settle in. What if the truth wasn't just unknown? What if it was unknowable? What if the forest didn't just hide things, but consumed them? The notion chilled many, yet also explained the unexplainable. That in Yosemite, as in life, some things simply disappear into the silence, into the shadows, into a realm beyond cameras, beyond footprints, beyond logic, into the very heartbeat of the wild. It has now been over a decade since George Penka vanished. His name is etched on a plaque in his hometown, beneath the words, "Forever missed, never forgotten." His family has since relocated, but the home where he once lived, his posters on the walls, his favorite hoodie on the hook behind the door, still stands, frozen in time. For the world, he has become a case number, a haunting story told in YouTube documentaries and true crime podcasts. But for Anna Maria, George remains alive in memory, a son who simply stepped into the trees and never stepped back out. Each theory, each sighting, each scrap of fabric or whisper from the woods only deepened the wound. There were no answers, only echoes, the kind that keep you awake at night, long after the world has stopped asking. In the absence of facts, a mythology grew. George Penka became a symbol, not just of a missing person, but of the unexplainable. His story is now shared among hikers as a cautionary tale, among religious communities as a test of faith, among online sleuths as a riddle that refuses to be solved. But behind all the speculation is a simple truth. An 18-year-old boy went to a concert with his friends and was never seen again. And maybe that's the most terrifying part, because it could have been anyone. He wasn't deep in the backcountry. He wasn't pushing limits or taking risks. He was where thousands of people go every year, a place of laughter, prayer, and music. And in the middle of that, in a moment so fast it slipped through everyone's fingers, he was gone, vanished. Not with a scream, not with a trail, with silence. To this day, hikers walk the trails of Yosemite and pause in shaded clearings, wondering if they are stepping where George once walked. Some say they've felt watched or heard a branch snap behind them when no one was there. Others leave small symbols, a folded flyer, a candle, a message scratched into bark, as if to say, "We remember you." But George Penka, if he still exists in any form, remains a ghost of the forest. Not because he died, but because his story was never given an ending. There is no closure, only a door left slightly ajar, only a mother's voice still calling into the void, only the rustling of leaves, and the knowing that somewhere, somehow, a moment unfolded that no one saw, a moment that stole a life and left behind a question that has no answer. George Penka didn't just go missing, he was erased. Not by time, not by accident, but by something deeper, something that waits quietly in the spaces between trees, between seconds, between the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe. In Yosemite, the wild is still beautiful, but sometimes it doesn't give people back. George Penka vanished, and the forest never told us why.